Sheriff Clifford, here we are.
Matt Todd, it's good to be here.
Good to have you back, sir. I've obviously we're coming up to election season soon, but I've been working a lot. I had the ICAC board member in here yesterday, and Lieutenant Sean Harper from Meridian the day before, talking about school lockdowns. And as such, I was talking to my brother-in-law, who's a Berkeley police officer, and it's something he said to me years ago, which I found really interesting, that has been on my mind as I've been hanging out with more law enforcement this week, is that he articulated when he just started, like, it's interesting being a police officer. And then he was saying peace officer. And he said, because I'm the physical arm through which the law works in the world, right? Like, we have written law, we have constitution, state and national. We have all of these rules, but those rules are meaningless in the absence of a physical person going and acting on them. And you were coming in today. I wanted to talk to you about that because you have sworn an oath to the Idaho Constitution, to the United States Constitution. And we are at a point in our culture and our society at large where there are these gray areas popping up, which is like, wait, what is going on? Like, I don't like the idea of this, but that's a me thing. Mm-hmm. That's not a Constitution thing. I had this great conversation with City Councilwoman Natalie Jangula from Nampa, and she was dealing with a lot of blowback from the Pride Festival that they had there. And she's like, listen, this is not a me thing. You didn't elect me to city council to just do whatever Natalie Jangula wanted. You elected me to the city council to uphold the laws of our land. And I have to do that. Talk to me about that in the sheriff's office.
Well, kind of the best way to explain why that's complicated and difficult is because you have these laws on the book, and as the sheriff, you take these oaths, Constitution, state constitution, enforce the law, and you have these what are seemingly black and white laws on the book, and then you have it mired with the complexities of human beings, all of their problems, emotions, decision-making, whatever circumstances are surrounding that. And you hold that code book up and you go, okay, this doesn't talk about the mire of human beings and what they prefer and what they don't prefer. I think, probably Nampa Pride Fest, that's a great example, right? The Constitution doesn't say, well, if you don't prefer something, then action must be taken. No, it says very clearly the action of these laws are taken if the laws are broken. And I think that's where we as human beings, we kind of lose that perspective based on preference, right? And I always say we're not the preference or the I don't like police. If we are going to take action, we're the executive branch of the government. The legislative branch made all these laws, and you're right. We are the mechanism through which the laws flow, right? The law enforcement is in America. I've said it over and over. It's the most intrusive form of government in America because those laws physically flow through human beings to other human beings. It takes their freedom. It stops their movement. It sometimes takes their kids, their dogs, whatever. I mean, you name it, right? But that's not a deputy or a sheriff's preference, right? So I don't think any deputy wants to walk around town going, I'm going to look for some kids to take. Or when they do find a situation, even though it's dire, their preference is not to separate children from their families. But when you look at all the totality of the circumstances and the messiness of humanity and the messiness of human beings, and you apply that law to that, they interconnect, and it's a mire of, all right, here's the action that we now have to take, whether it's our preference or not. And then the judicial branch will tell us if you did the right thing or not. And it's our goal to do the right thing. But that judicial branch of the government, that's another checks and balance on the most intrusive form of government in America.
My brother's getting married next week, and he's asked me to officiate the wedding. Mm-hmm. And we were talking literally last night about the vows they want to do. And they just want to do the classic vows: honor, protect, serve, respect, all those things. And it really struck me last night. And now when you're talking about this, it's like, okay, but how does that work? Like, you make a vow to this person, the person you're supposed to be closest with in the whole world. This becomes your person. And we have these clear guidelines. Like, I'm going to make a vow to do these things. Okay, well, how does that apply on Tuesday night, right? Like, how does that apply in this? And, obviously, if somebody's judging it, if we had a judicial system reviewing marriages, we'd like to say that, okay, we executed perfectly on these things. First off, the execution is not always going to be what people want, right? Like, if it were easy, then we wouldn't even really have to have a vow. We're like, well, this is just what we're going to do because it's easy. But it seems so impossible when you consider just a basic, not even a page worth of words that become impossible to appropriately navigate at all points and hamper your individual preferences. It's like, that's an impossible thing for most people anyway. Just a commitment to one person. Most people are like, I don't like this, I'm out. It's like, well, it's not about you. You made a vow, right?
Yep. And, that's something that I've said before as well. When you're a sheriff, especially, you're not a legislator, and no knock on legislators, but legislators are elected by people who want them to vote a certain way or create laws that they have preference for, right? But that's not the role of the sheriff, is to fulfill your preference. It's are you able to protect me and give law and order and keep the peace and make sure that we're safe? Meaning, all right, the Democrats all vote for the Democrat, right? Okay, that's fair. We have this party system.
Yeah.
But my preference, I can't take a preference and say, well, Democrats don't get service then. That's not how this works. I remember there's been hundreds of times in my career where some hardened felon who's committed crimes in the past, or maybe was a victim during even like a drug deal, that person gets service, and the service that all of us swore we would give to the public and the citizens of Ada County. That guy gets it too. They were in a knife fight, and the drug deal didn't go very well, and that guy stabbed him. And guess what? He's the victim of an aggravated assault. He's the victim, and we have to treat him like the victim. Whether your preference is, I've arrested that guy 4 times, I really don't like him, he's a dirtbag. Doesn't matter, right? That's a good example. I don't even think the political thing is as great an example as that. You know what? I don't prefer this fellow right here. I prefer he stay as far away from me as possible, but he's a victim of a crime. He gets the service that anyone else should get. And that's what you really have to focus on especially when you're a sheriff as an elected official, is nope, it's for everyone. Whether you like it or not, you get service.
Right. I really like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been doing it for a long time, and departments in the area do in fact have, like training in the evenings or things like that for officers, or if just for the general public, they have training areas. And I volunteered time at one of them, like, hey, I'd love to come and help. And the chief was like, yeah, come teach class. So I come and teach class, have a great time, get to train with the chief as well as other people. And afterwards, the chief was telling me, he was like, yeah, that guy in the blue gi, he's a felon. And I'm like, okay, cool. Did he get the arm bar? Like, did he understand? Because again, like, I'm not a law enforcement agent. I never have been. But I do understand, like, look, if I show up to do a job, if I'm showing up to teach people, and somebody shows up and they want to learn, that's my job, right? It's like, help them understand this thing. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I feel like you're saying, which is, listen, in the eyes, as far as the Constitution is concerned, it doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't ever matter that. Does it ever worry you? And I know that I'm kind of putting you on the spot. When people talk about disliking let's take the Pride Parade. I did not go to the Pride Parade. Right. I do not plan on going to the Pride Parade.
Right.
The Pride Parade exists. Okay, all of these things are clear. But it concerns me that people are saying, I don't like the Pride Parade, and I want it to be shut down, and I want to get every single person who allowed the Pride Parade to exist to get, unelected or booted out or whatever it is, even in the absence of broken laws. They want that to come to pass. And that concerns me, because I always wondered, like, okay, But if we take the laws of our land down to individual preference, what happens if somebody gets in control and has preferences counter to mine? Right? Like, what happens then? Then you've loaded the gun for them. Now that they're like, okay, well, I get to do whatever I want. And let's say there's like, I really like pork. Let's say this person doesn't like pork. They're like, we're going to outlaw pork in the county. It's like, oh no, but like, I like pork. like, wait, we can't do that.
Well, you're breaking down the whole fabric of what America was built on.
Right.
Of freedom, right? Of, what you can have religious freedom. You can have, you can express yourself. You can have your First Amendment rights. If you start saying, well, we're going to have it be about preference, and so I don't like it, so you don't get to do that thing. That is wholeheartedly un-American, wholeheartedly. And I've experienced that right in my face. I've had to secure, this is a small BLM protest outside Governor Rish's home. And, I'm familiar with Governor Rish, and he lives in an area that I patrolled for a long time. And I remember going there thinking these people are anti-law enforcement, and they are, because they let us know that they were anti-law enforcement. And I am here to secure a place for them to exercise their First Amendment right and make sure that they're okay. This is huge irony. Is it my preference to do that? It's not my preference to do that, because they're going to be, for lack of a better term, they're going to be mean, right? Like, why would I want to go down there and help out anybody who's just going to be mean and disrespectful? Set up everything they need so that they're protected from traffic. Give them kind of you can't go on, Senator Rish's property. Like, that's trespassing. Right. Here's the rules. Very, very polite. Okay, thank you. And then they line up and chant about, law enforcement and how horrible we are. And then when it's all over, they just leave. And I thought, what's the irony here? But the deal is, I swore that oath to the Constitution, and that's their First Amendment right. And it's also their right to be safe. And if I need to make sure that cars aren't going to hit them or people aren't going to run across the street and punch them in the face, well, that's the oath I upheld. Do I like it? Nope, because I know they are anti-me. And that's the huge irony. But that's a great example of preference. So what if I say, well, I don't like what you're going to do here, so forget it. You can't. That goes wholeheartedly against the fabric of our nation.
Man, that's I could not imagine.
It was the weirdest, not the weirdest day I've ever had, for sure.
Weirdest.
I remember getting home, like, that was bizarre. And but knowing, but that's my job, right? That's my job. I swore these oaths. It's my job to make sure people are protected. It's my job to make sure people feel safe and their freedoms are not infringed upon, even if I don't like it.
Do you remember the people in Seattle in CHOP, Chaz or whatever it was? And they were all anti-establishment. They're all anti-cop. They're all anti-whatever. And they established themselves. They usurp this multiple blocks, right?
Yep.
And immediately set up a border.
Yes.
They immediately set up self-defense mechanisms. And then they immediately establish security guards. They make their own police force essentially within this area, letting people in and out. And then they start enforcing whatever preferential laws and people died in there.
Yep, so they did. It was, And I watched a bunch of interviews with some of the people that were the security people, and they were like, we're leaving. We don't have, they said, we don't have the equipment or the training for this. We can't do this. And I just laughed. No kidding. Because I've always said that. Your hardcore anti-establishment, anti-government people, let's say, okay, all the government went away. First thing they do is they'll establish government.
Right. Somebody's got to be in charge.
It's just it's the government they prefer.
Right. In the last several years, there has been a lot of conversations and discussions about what government is doing. And I understand the established governments in certain places, like in California, where I moved from. I was not a fan of what happened. Sure. Obviously I left, right? I'm like, this is bonkers. It's off the rails. And a lot of that sentiment has has been very pervasive throughout the nation. How do you think that is playing, or how do you think we're dealing with the echoes of that now?
Are you talking about government overreach?
Government overreach. When people are talking about law enforcement, the number one thing I hear them talking about is, law enforcement agents that have an obligation to the people and to their oaths. And every time I hear people say this, I'm like, yes, oh my gosh, I wholeheartedly agree. Right. Like, and I understand we have an elected law enforcement system, and then we have, police departments within cities. But I'm like, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like, what aspect of, let's say, Ada County Sheriff do you feel has not fulfilled constitutional obligations? And most people, when I ask them this in good faith, because I want to know, because if you've screwed up, I want to know. I really want to know.
Sure.
I'm one of your constituents.
Right.
And most people are like, oh, well, over COVID. I'm like, okay, hang on a sec.
I've heard this one.
Yeah. Now, mind you, I was not here over COVID. I got here in 22. You were not sheriff over the 2021, 2020, 2021. But I feel like that's an attitude, that's a concern, that's an anxiety that people have, which is we feel our rights had been trampled on over a certain period of time. And whether or not they had, I was not here, I cannot make comment, but the sentiment of like, we need people to support us. We need to feel like there's a law enforcement that will stand for us.
Yeah. So I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that's some weird rumor that's actually floating around about me particularly. I was the Eagle police chief, and Jason Pierce was the mayor of Eagle at the time, and COVID hits, and it was strange. I didn't even have that much communication with the sheriff at the time, but Jason and I teamed up, and we had just really kind of got to know each other. I think he'd been in office for like 3 months, and we started going, hey, like, how do you want to deal with this? And kind of this back and forth of two somewhat strangers going, what, trying to feel it out. And we start realizing, oh, we're on the same page here. Yeah. We're not ticketing people. We're not arresting people. We're not doing this because the legislation didn't set up a law that says, sheriff, you're going to implement this law to arrest people for such and such. Well, that's pretty clear to me. I even consulted the prosecutor and said, hey, what are your ideas on this? And like, what are we going to clog up the court system with a bunch of citations that are going to go nowhere? And so we didn't anywhere in the county. We never arrested anybody, and no one ever got a citation. We were very, very courteous with people about, I remember somebody called into the Eagle Police. There's somebody working out in the gym. They're supposed to be at home. All right, well, don't go in there. I'll tell you, don't go in there, right? I'm not going to go in and tell them you can't be in the gym working out, go home.
God, good for you,
not a law.
Man. God bless you, sir.
Now trespassing was a different thing. Let's say you're a small business owner and you require people to wear masks. All right, well, we'll show up, but nobody's getting mask mandate laws against them. Now, if you want them to leave and they won't leave, we can charge them with trespassing. I don't believe we charged anyone with trespassing. We could usually work it out, or they left before we got there.
Yeah, but and that's on that business. The business is like, listen, this is my shop.
No shirt, no shoes, no service.
Yeah, right, man.
But it was, we vowed, Pierce and I, like, listen, we'll do education and try and do some mediation here, but there's not a law that the legislation created that says, hey, the sheriff and any other law enforcement officers, you're going to enforce this. It just wasn't a law. So we're like, well, we can't enforce that. So the quote unquote lockdown happens, and it's not like people are, it's certainly people weren't doing all of their normal things,
right? But
we weren't going to inhibit them from going to the grocery store, going to a doctor's office, going to the gym. Like that's part of their
freedom,
their freedoms, right? Like I just described, your freedom to go about your business. So yeah, that's a weird, there are all kinds of weirdness because it's election year that float around about me. And that was one of them that, when he was chief, he locked down the city of Eagle. Like, yeah, I don't think so.
I knew you were chief of police at Eagle at some point. I didn't know it was during that time frame, because Eagle and Star were two cities that were like, nah, I ain't playing ball.
Exactly.
Like, we're not doing this.
Yeah. And I can't speak for the other cities.
Right.
But
Yeah, I don't mean to imply that
Sure.
any other cities,
Sure.
but like I just knew those two in
Yeah.
particular. I had spoken to Mayor Chadwick, and he
Yep.
was like, "Yeah, nah,
No.
we were not doing that. We opened back our council meetings and things of that nature."
Yeah, because the business needs to still move forward. The machine of the city and law enforcement still needs to move forward. And quite frankly, Idaho did better on recovering than a lot of other states who stayed in lockdown, like legitimate lockdown, for a long time, where we opened up a lot quicker. And I can't speak for every place in Idaho, but most places didn't do enforcement. And so people were able to go about their lives, and our economy thrived a lot more than a lot of other places because we didn't restrict people to, well, you will stay in your home. You're under lockdown. We got people patrolling the street looking. No, that didn't happen here. And if you weren't here during COVID and you were stuck in some other state that did that, then I'm sorry. But the people here had it a lot better than other places in America.
Yeah, the pain of existence in other places seems to continue to plague. All you have to say for any political campaign, which I'm realizing, and it's like, look, I'm not for or against people. They can market out and campaign however they want, but it's like all you have to say is like California.
Right.
It's like, and if you want to galvanize a certain portion of people, all you have to do is draw an analogy to, say, California and be like, well, California does this, therefore it is bad. And boom, instead of saying, hey, this is what we're doing in Ada County, this is working, this is not working, we're going to move forward. It's like, that's a burdensome thing because you have the burden of establishing whether something is right or wrong. California's already done all its own marketing. So everybody's like, okay, great. So like all I have to say is this buzzword and then we can move forward. And by the way, for right reasons. Like my cackles come up if somebody's like California, like, like I can't, it really was and continues to be what people say it was. It is my assertion that it's like, look, you're at the end. You're at the end of your capacity to maintain a civilized, organized community that honors people's rights. But we're not in that state, so let's not talk about that. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, I think we enjoy a lot of things here as law enforcement and as the community because we peek outside the window and go, yeah, that's not what we want. And the people of Idaho and the people moving here in general have a very good respect for law enforcement, but it's a symbiotic relationship, right? It's because we respect them and we give good service and they respect us back. And that, it just keeps going back and forth that way. So you can't have only one of those things happening. If you have respectful law enforcement and the community treats them like crap and disrespects them and all that, like that dwindles down to, honestly, you'll have less community safety, less proactivity, cops that have a chip on their shoulder because they know people hate them. But the reverse is true too. If the community is supporting you, you can't just be like, well, I got a carte blanche card to be doing whatever I want. Right. It is a back and forth. And that's what we have here. And we always have, even in times where it may be perceived as low, it's nothing compared to other places in the country because we get back up on that high point because of that relationship.
Gotcha. In speaking with a lot of law enforcement groups, it seems that there's a concern and action being taken throughout the state of Idaho to but modify requirements for gaining office to the office of sheriffs throughout different counties. That I'm putting this very poorly, but I've heard about this from a couple people that they're like, hey, in some places there are people running that collectively we agree should not be considerations. Am I getting this essentially correct?
Yes. Probably better to get down to the specific of it so it's doesn't sound like preference, right?
Right.
But
like, for instance, felons can't vote. Right. So like we have things that happen within our society that we say, okay, if you have done this, we are going to restrict this ability from you. Yep. And there's something similar going on with law enforcement in Idaho.
Yeah. So especially the sheriffs, because, we have 44 counties, 44 sheriffs, and your requirement to become sheriff is basically nothing. 18 years old and a resident of the county for a year. That's your only requirement. If you are police chief or a police officer or even a deputy, you can't be a felon. You can't be decertified. There is extensive background checks that go along with everything. Every police chief has an extensive background. Well, I shouldn't say that. Most police chiefs have an extensive background check and have to meet all of these requirements. If I get them all the time because it's kind of a spam email where it's like, hey, this city in Virginia is looking for a police chief, and they put out these feelers to see who will apply from all over the nation.
Who wants to go to Virginia?
And here's the requirements, and it's a huge list of these requirements. Who wants to be the sheriff? Anybody. Right? Anybody. If we talk about the sheriff as the chief law enforcement officer, it's the only elected officer, the only part of our law enforcement that is required to exist is the sheriff, and nothing against police chiefs, but we'll just let anybody do it. And it's a professional career. And especially in today's world where it's under such scrutiny, I'm talking law enforcement, not just sheriff. It's under such scrutiny, and there's so much liability and so much risk to the people's safety, risk to the taxpayer if you do it wrong. Like, there's so much of that, and we just let anybody do it. So years ago, we went to legislation, and I brought it up. I brought it up to some of the smaller, I brought it up to the Sheriff's Association, which I'm part of. And I said, hey, we need to professionalize this. We need to professionalize this and say that you have to be, peace officer certified or something. Well, in smaller, rural areas, that's not always the case. They might only have,
Right.
Kenny at the hardware store is going to run because we don't have it, right?
Right.
So I said, okay, well, how about you can't be a felon? And it got shot down. That was 3 years ago. Well, we're back on it this year because in the state of Idaho this year, 3 sheriffs had decertified police officers running against them. So,
okay, what is a decertified police officer?
So decertified means the state of the state of Idaho has pulled your certification because you've done something in a long list of you can't be a police officer anymore. It's something unethical. Almost always, right? So you no longer have the certification of being a police officer in Idaho. So you can't get hired as a peace officer because if you're not certified and you go out and you do something, it'll crush you. It'll crush your agency because you're not even certified. You'll lose that in court all day long, right? So when you get your certification pulled or decertified. It's a message to everyone in America to say, this guy, the state of Idaho, does not believe he can be.
You've lost faith,
right?
Right.
So the Caldwell case, I feel comfortable talking about it because it was very public. But Joey Hoagley, I think it was the name. Joey Hoagley, Caldwell gets federally indicted, guilty, federal prison. Well, he gets his certification pulled. He can't be a cop. He's a felon. He can't be a cop anywhere in America, not in Nebraska, not in Washington, not in Idaho. He can never be a cop again. He is decertified. He's a felon, but he can be the sheriff anywhere in Idaho. How does that make you feel as a taxpayer and a voter? Really? That is a real thing. You can be a felon and you can be a decertified cop and you can be the elected law of the land, right? Doesn't make sense. So, especially after this year's primaries, I didn't have a decertified person run against me in the primary. So, but I went back to the Sheriff's Association and said, we've got to do something here. This is insane. It's laughable. And this is supposed to be a very professional, a career and a professional figurehead. And, you could be a felon. So we just, in the last month or two, changed the Idaho Sheriff's Association bylaws to say if you are a decertified officer or you are a felon or you become a felon or become decertified while in office, you can no longer be part of the Idaho Sheriff's Association. And that's a big deal because they certify your jail. And so if you are not part of the association, they will not certify your jail. And you can still have a jail, but when you get sued, and the defense attorney says, oh, your jail's not certified by this body in Idaho that certifies all the jail, you just put the taxpayer at risk. You've put the county at risk. So I'm hoping within this legislative session that we bring that forward again to at least do decertified and felons. Because I look like in my office, there are places in the building that if you're a felon, you can't be there because there are what's called CJIS requirements, so requirements by the federal government because of the sensitive nature of data that we hold with people's personal information and all of those types of things. You have to go through a testing process and certification every year to be able to even be in those parts of the building. So if you were a felon at Ada County, you could get down the hallway into my office. But if you want to go into other places in the building, you'll have to be at least escorted, or you're not allowed in some places.
If you're a felon.
And you're the sheriff.
Man, that's a trip.
Isn't that weird?
It's a little wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. Freedom, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is obviously there's a balance between this, overreaching government and nanny state, and then just, hey, anything goes.
Yeah.
Like what a trip. And I don't even in the abstract mind that if we're all playing by the same rules and have the same information, that's ultimately the thing that, I strive for here, which is to spread more high quality information. And like I was doing a core value form today to send to somebody. And part of it was that it's like, listen, I do not know anything. Like that's my core value. I'm an idiot. And I should never presume that I actually know the right answer moving forward with things. My whole point is to provide information to Idahoans and let Idahoans decide. That is like fundamental to what I do. But in the absence of that, in the absence of high quality information, then it's like, oh, things are getting crazy now.
Right. Well, and I think that requirement thing is a good example, right? Because people in the state of Idaho, for the most part, don't realize that.
Right.
But as a collective in the communities in Idaho, that's not what they want. Right. Now, like, I can't speak for everyone, but I've been in this state my whole life. I'm pretty sure the majority of the people in Idaho don't want a felon or a decertified cop as their sheriff. And when I tell people that, every time I tell them, they're appalled because they just don't know.
They don't know.
Where's the information?
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of those things where we're talking about preference and law. So if you want to talk about preference, which we have been talking about, I truly believe in the state of Idaho that it is probably people's preference that a decertified cop and a felon are not their sheriff. And I can't speak for everybody in Idaho, but having grown up my whole life in this state, I'm pretty sure that's the feeling. So we'll go to the legislators and explain our case, and it's up to them what the law is going to be. But that'll be our push. Is America expects this, and this, very strict things out of their law enforcement. You can't have a felon or a decertified cop leading the way for an agency.
Speaking of requirements, is there any requirement for any police service or background in law enforcement at all to apply to be the sheriff? Because, and again, I didn't know about the felon or the decertified police, but there are people in different outside of Ada County that are running for law enforcement that do not have experience as professional police officers, volunteers perhaps, but
right.
Is there any requirement for that? And do you think that would be a good or bad thing?
There is no requirement for it. And I think it is a bad thing. Especially when you look at the larger agencies around the state, where you can just have Kenny from the hardware store be your sheriff. The larger agencies especially need to have somebody who's got experience in both. For a sheriff's office especially, we do so many different things as far as dispatch and jail and court.
Right.
They need to have a well-rounded understanding of all of those things, and they need to be relevant in today's police world, right? I mean, technology and police tactics and training and equipment moves so fast that you're out of the game for 4 or 5 years, and you're almost starting over from square one.
Right.
So you really do need somebody that has experience to come in there. And most of the sheriffs, if not all of them, have some kind of relevant law enforcement experience, meaning they've been in the game
for a while
and recently, and then they get into the position. That's most of the sheriffs around the state.
Sure. I was, and again, I was talking to the Idaho Crimes Against Children Coalition, one of the board members yesterday. He was in for an interview, and he got into that organization in 2011, 2012. They renamed it, did this whole thing. But even in those 12 years after he really got into it, it was like, just considering that one facet of law enforcement, internet crimes against children, imagine how different the world became after the App Store was created. Like if you just want to crack this one small field, which I'm very passionate about educating people on, the world has changed drastically in a tiny time frame. And this individual, Vic Dominguez, who is part of it and goes around the state and educates people, he's like, it is so different now, even in 12 years. And just the speed with which the law enforcement capacity, the need for law enforcement, what's involved, the laws surrounding it, everything has changed. And it's just, man, it'd be wild just educating people that are out of it, educating parents that have no experience or understanding about what's going on in that facet of law enforcement or what could happen to their kids. Just educating them, like their eyes get gigantic. It's like, this is with their kids, and this is, it's a crazy thing.
You're right. And that's a sliver.
That's a tiny thing.
That's a tiny thing. It's a sliver of what law enforcement is doing. I mean, can you imagine taking a guy and saying, hey, we have these cryptocurrency crimes. That wasn't around when I was.
We can't start on cryptocurrency. My head
right? Like, I mean, there's all of these different facets that you really have to have at least a little bit of knowledge and experience on, right? Or, I remember when I started, we didn't have cell phones, right? And how far have we come just because of cell phones, and looking at calls for service on our cell phone now, and those types of things. I mean, it has just rapidly changed year after year, and you have to adapt and overcome, and make sure you're paving the way forward. So you get somebody with no experience in that, and I mean, you're moving your agency backwards.
Right. I know you have a lot to do today. It's a work day. Thank you for making the time to come in. Is there anything you'd like to say at closing?
I don't know. I think we had a good discussion.
Great discussion. I appreciate it. Thank you for what you're doing for Ada County. I appreciate you. Good luck with your campaign. And again, just to be clear, if anybody's wondering, I have invited Doug Trouble on again. I've already had him on, and I want to be really clear. I'm happy to talk to both of you guys.
Sure.
So thank you for making the time today, and good luck.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.